Hello! So I had actually just been filming a video about why I went on a second date with my ex. But in that video, I've said I remember struggling to say that I felt uncomfortable. And I struggled to say I felt uncomfortable because uncomfortable to me is a very heavy word. It carries a lot of connotations, and I am always hesitant to use that word because it feels like you are saying something deep and like ruthless about a person, and I don't wield it easily, especially in this context, because I feel like saying I felt uncomfortable on the first date with my ex, who would later end up assaulting me, it feels like it says a lot of things. And so I was watching the video back and I watched myself mute myself and change my word choice. And I remember doing it in the moment as well. And it prompted me to come back and talk about uncomfortable, because I feel like that is one of the main feelings that I really wrestled with justifying as being deserving of being named as something I experience, and as being a valid reason for me to not continue in a relationship during the earlier parts of my journey of trying to develop and throughout my life. I feel like I have, in my mind, I associate the word uncomfortable with a very specific definition that is connected to like somebody assaulting you, somebody violating your presence, violating your safety, your safe space. And if you say you feel uncomfortable about someone, or you feel uncomfortable around someone, you need to be prepared to list exactly why. And this is not something I would apply to other people. As we all know, with these types of things, it's only applied to us. So it's not something I would be like, my friends are not allowed, it was just with me. If I'm going to say that somebody makes me uncomfortable, I need to have evidence to back that up. And also, like, I need to be careful. I need to be very careful with my words, very watchful of what I say, because I understand that words have power. But I've kind of ended up weaponizing that understanding against myself oftentimes to silence myself and limit the truth, manipulate the truth into what I feel most comfortable to have represented and said out of my mouth, usually out of the protection of other people and out of a self-protection, out of not wanting to be wrong. I have a big fear about getting things wrong and not being able to prove myself, not being able to back myself up with anything, and then having been caught mischaracterizing somebody, misaligning them with a narrative that is harmful. I think I have a fear a little bit of being a bad person, and not in a way where it's like, oh, I don't want to be a bad, but I think I actually have a bit of a legitimate fear around it. And it's not the healthy kind. I wouldn't say it's particularly healthy, because what I've associated with being a bad person is usually with just drawing boundaries or just allowing yourself to not want to do something. And what I was realizing that I needed to acknowledge as I was watching that video back, and these videos have been so good for me recently because I watch them and I listen to myself, and then I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, no, okay, let's talk about that, because that's not okay. You shouldn't feel that way. And what I was realizing is that, like, I felt uncomfortable on that first date. I felt uncomfortable because I didn't feel compatible with this person. My discomfort and the lack of compatibility were happening at the same time because they are connected. If I feel comfortable with somebody, I'm probably compatible with them. And I know that because I have like 0 friends right now, and I'm just best friends with my sisters. And I have one friend, I have one friend and another friend that and that's it. because those are the people that I feel comfortable around. And that's it. And that's it. And I've had to do all of this breaking down of my relationships and getting rid of relationships because I was uncomfortable in them, because we weren't compatible, because I had an ability to shapeshift myself, to make myself fit into relationships, and I would do it all the time. And it's not a healthy thing. I'm not proud of it, but I would do it all the time. So it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that I was not myself. I was not able to be myself in a lot of the relationships that I had, because that's not the way I showed up initially. Or if I had showed up that way initially, something had happened within that relationship to show me that it wasn't safe to be myself. And instead of taking myself out of that relationship, I just decided to change. Instead of leaving, I just decided to change, or limit something, block a part of myself, ignore something, whatever. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but I'm just briefly explaining a little bit of what that history's been like. But on that first date, I was uncomfortable. And I am thinking back to it now because I haven't recalled it in a very long time. And yeah, I was uncomfortable. I could feel that we weren't meant to be together. I could feel that this wasn't my person, and that this wasn't a relationship that I needed to just even just have for fun. It wasn't one of those situations. I didn't want to be romantically connected to this person. I knew that I wouldn't want to be physically connected to this person. I felt uncomfortable. I think we held hands at the end of the date, or maybe that was another date where I also felt uncomfortable. I don't know. But there was something about the ending of the date that made me really uncomfortable too. And I think there was a physical aspect to it. I think we did end up holding hands, and I don't think I wanted to, and I felt uncomfortable. And I've kind of erased those feelings a little bit when I talk about it, because I think it's connected to this feeling of it not being valid, of my feelings not being valid, because, why did you feel uncomfortable? He wasn't doing anything to you. He wasn't being mean to you. You don't say you felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is a big word. Uncomfortable is a serious word. Don't say you felt that way. I can be a little bit aggressive with myself when it comes to being watchful of my words. And I have an idea of where that comes from, but it's not something I want to talk about online. But yeah, so I saw myself do that in the video, and it made me sad that I did that, because I'm realizing as I'm trying to speak up more about this issue and talk about it and just share. I'm really doing this because it's also cathartic for me. I'm seeing a lot of where I still have a lot of work to do, and not serious work. It's kind of just correcting work like this, where it's I know something, I didn't do something, let me come back and share what I just noticed, so that because I imagine I'm not the only person to do this to themselves and to have moments like that. So yeah, I felt uncomfortable. I'm allowed to say that. I felt uncomfortable on the first date. And no, he didn't hurt me. He wasn't doing anything horrible to me. I just felt uncomfortable. I'm allowed to feel uncomfortable, even if somebody isn't, violating me. And that doesn't mean my feelings of discomfort are not a statement on his character. It's not about him. It's about me. It's about how I feel. I have to tell myself that, and I have to remind myself that sometimes, because it's always well, what are the consequences for the other person involved in whatever relationship or dynamic I'm confronting at whatever time. I often struggle with, what are you saying about them? What are you doing to them by acknowledging certain feelings, by saying certain things? What are you doing to them? How are you harming them? How is this going to affect them? And it's not going to affect them. It's not harming them. I'm not doing anything to them by acknowledging that I felt uncomfortable, because it's about me. I'm talking about my own experience. I'm not saying anything about him. I'm not saying he made me uncomfortable because he did this. I just felt uncomfortable. That's valid. That's okay. And I have to remind myself of that. And the discomfort, I think, came from our lack of compatibility. And it's just simple as that. And I don't know if there's anything that could have fixed that, because even when we had compatible moments, like with our conversations, with some of our conversations, which I've made so powerful in my mind as these are the things that worked, these are the things that made sense, because I need to remind myself that I wasn't just completely selling myself out. There were reasons why I felt that I could go through with this, that this wasn't harmful to me. I didn't go into this relationship thinking I was harming myself. That's not what I was doing, so I had my reasons. And I do think it's important to hold on to those to protect my younger self, and to make sure she knows that I don't think she's just some inattentive idiot who just makes rash decisions and doesn't care for herself. I don't think that about myself at all. I know that I was trying to protect myself and that I thought I was making an okay decision. I just simply didn't have the tools. I didn't have the full awareness that I needed to. There was a lot that I was up against that I didn't realize I was up against when it comes to my own mind, my own patterns. And I ended up having to pay the price for that. But it's not something I deserved. And so, yeah, discomfort, being uncomfortable. We are allowed to say that we felt uncomfortable. You're allowed to say that it was uncomfortable, You're allowed to say that. And I think especially within the Me Too movement, and whenever people talk about their experiences with sexual violence, they're like, you felt uncomfortable, well, why didn't you leave? What made you feel uncomfortable? You have to you experience a lot of interrogation. And I think out of self-protection, my inner voice can be interrogating sometimes. And before I speak, before I use certain words, I can interrogate myself. And I'm not doing it intentionally to be aggressive or be mean or belittle myself, but I'm just watchful, and I'm just be careful with what you say. Be careful with what you say, because you can't take things back, and you need to make sure you know what you're talking about. Everything is very serious. And so yeah, I recognized myself doing that in that video, and I wanted to come on here and say it, because I don't think it would have been obvious to anybody else, because you're not in my brain. But it's one of the things you go through as you're trying to unpack and discuss these things. There's so much self-monitoring happening all the time. And that's why I also felt really uneloquent in that video. And then I was watching it back and I was like, why did you feel that way? There's nothing wrong with what you were saying. But it's because in my mind, there's so many conversations happening in my mind as I was having that conversation, because I was trying to be clear. I was trying to be protective of myself. I was trying to be honest. I was trying to not misrepresent what happened, misrepresent how I felt, misrepresent who he was. I was trying to make sure I was accountable and I wasn't just playing myself as a victim. There's so many things I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing, and not to be perceived as a good person or a perfect person, but to make sure I am being a good person. And I guess I'm realizing that sometimes I associate being a good person with being able to be perfect and check all these boxes, but it's not intentional doing that. It's something, I guess, beneath the surface that I haven't gotten a chance to completely uproot. And it's a process with everything. So I'm glad that I noticed it and I'm at a point where I can clock that and talk about it, because it's important, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who does that. So yeah, I just wanted to come back and share that because I noticed it, and I'm allowed to say I was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable on that first date because I knew I wasn't compatible, and I was probably also uncomfortable because I knew I wasn't compatible, and I knew that I was going to struggle to do something about that because of the way the date was going. So there was also a discomfort with myself. Not only was I uncomfortable with him because I knew we weren't compatible, and so we got along because I can get along with like anyone. I really can get along with a lot of people. But we got along because I was making myself like attainable and easy to get along with, which I do, and I don't always do that consciously. Sometimes I just recognize what's needed to make the relationship smoother or to make something more easy, and I do it without questioning whether I should be doing that. And I've had to bring up the part of myself that questions whether I should do something. It takes effort to bring that part up. It's easier for me to just switch. So yeah, I was uncomfortable with him, but I was also probably uncomfortable with myself a little bit in that moment, because while I didn't have the tools and the self-awareness to know exactly what I was doing, on some level, I think I probably did know that I was going to continue on with this situation, even though I didn't want to. And that's really hard, and that is something that I've never really said out loud, but saying that makes me sad and makes me kind of want to cry, because it's like being trapped in your own body or like in your own mind, you know? Like, you know you don't want to do something, but you also, it's like, you know you're not strong enough yet, or you don't have whatever you need to do something differently. And that's such a crazy position to be in, because, you know, you feel like you're fully autonomous. I've never felt, I don't know, I wouldn't say never, but I don't very often feel like I'm being ruled by someone else or something else. I feel that I have a lot of freedom and power to make my own decisions. And I feel that I am responsible for myself and accountable for myself, and that I am autonomous. But thinking back, like, I know there was a part of myself that knew I was going to struggle to say something, which I talked about in that video, the anxiety. And I just kind of grieve for the version of me that was in there, that didn't want to go through with this, that knew I didn't want to go through with this from the beginning, and perhaps felt a little bit helpless because she knew that we were going to go through it anyways, because we just didn't know how to say no at that point to something that wasn't extremely violent or extremely violating or extremely, you know, just in the extreme. And so I feel sad for that version of myself that had to deal with that. And I know that part of myself is probably a lot louder today and probably more at the forefront of who I am today. So that's me that had to deal with that. And it's crazy to think about how small you've been inside of yourself. You know, there are versions of myself that are so small within me now. And I think that that's a good thing, because it's not small in a disempowering way. It's small in a way where, you know, they're like a child, and I can comfort them and I can carry them. And, you know, they're at the size that they need to be at. But then throughout my life, I've also, like, this version of me, who has always been within me, has been so small. And I've been able to feel her at certain moments, and I can imagine, but I can't imagine how disempowering it must have felt, because she was not the version of me leading at the forefront of who I was. I didn't get to experience all of her emotions and grief in fullness in a conscious way. But I grieve for how hard it must have been to experience what I was experiencing, like when there was no from the beginning, you know, because it's like being violated from the beginning. And I feel sad for that part of myself, and I know I didn't do that to myself, and it wasn't intentional and anything like that, but it's just sad that it happens, that it happened. So yeah, let's not make myself cry. There's no need to make myself cry about this. I guess I've just never thought about that before. I don't think I've ever thought about that before. So it's hard. But yeah, I just wanted to come on here and correct that I noticed. Not correct it, but just talk about it, unpack it a little bit. And I mean, that's it. So I'll see you next time.